I want to just welcome everyone. This is the Policy and Taxation Group Supporters Call, Family Enterprise USA Members Call. The call is being recorded. Everyone is on mute. So if you want to ask questions, please put it in the chat or the Q&A. We will attempt to monitor those questions as we go through the presentation. The first half hour, we won't have too much time for questions, but we'll do the best we can. For those of you who are on the call, most of you are supporters of one or the other organization, Policy and Taxation Group or Family Enterprise USA. If you are not, please, we need your help more than ever this year, as we'll talk about. Please go on our websites, Family Enterprise USA, Policy and Taxation Group, become a member, become a supporter. Please donate, please help our efforts. So with that, I'm not going to go through the agenda because of the short time frame. I'm going to let Frank Luntz, who everyone knows, and as everyone realizes, has worked with us for over the last 25 years and has been a very, very valuable resource to us. So Frank's going to talk about Biden's first 100 days. Frank, you want to unmute yourself? And
yes, no one has ever said that to me. It was always the opposite, Patton. Frank, do you want to mute yourself? That's like the goal of Washington, D.C. Some of you are aware that that Fox in general and Tucker Carlson has been going after me for the last week. The premier New York Times podcast was released today, where I discuss some of the challenges that I'm facing and Republicans who aren't insane are facing. These are awful times, and I'm actually in a car heading to the airport right now, which is why I apologize for this look. I'm still too fat, so I stopped eating as of today. You guys want to know about Joe Biden? I want to show you, if I can, a language slide. And I invite you to take a photograph if you wish to, because I want to be helpful to this organization. And Pat made an appeal without giving a reason. And I will tell you that what is about to happen in Washington and what is already happening is the complete change of the idea of economic freedom and personal responsibility. We are putting more money out right now than has ever been spent since FDR in 1933. And you all realize that someone's gonna have to pay for it. And guess what? All of you on this call are going to be targeted. Whether you have a business or individually, they're looking at you personally. And frankly, there's a very good chance that he's going to be successful because he's spending more money than Washington has ever spent, and it's got to come from someone's pockets. So Pat, you actually have the right to say to them that either you can help us with a small donation now, or you're going to be making a huge donation to the federal government 6 months from now. And so I want to echo what you're saying, because we've never seen anything like this. I urge you to take a look at this chart, because it is not capitalism that you're defending, it's economic freedom. Capitalism is about Wall Street. Capitalism is about owners. Capitalism is about the wealthy and the successful. Economic freedom is about Main Street, small business owners, employees, and it is more positive, more favorable but by a 2-to-1 margin. We need to be involved in inclusion. And I know that there's some people on the Republican side that simply reject what's happening in our cities and our communities across the country. You can't. Capital has to be available to everyone. Opportunity has to be available to everyone. If it is not, we will fail as a society. But we have to do a better job at explaining that, which you've not done. If you look at peace of mind, it's more powerful than security, because security means you need a dog, a fence, some sort of protection. Peace of mind says things are okay, and particularly now with the economy where it is, with COVID where it is, people are dying, are desperately seeking peace of mind more than anything else. 2 more, and then I'll move straight on to Biden. But this is actually more important for you. A problem solver. That's what the public is looking for in their elected officials. I know some of you are involved in elections. Some of you are involved in political parties. A problem solver is someone who gets it done. Everyone else talks about it. A problem solver actually does it. And finally, that phrase, hardworking taxpayers. I've said it to this group before, and I got to keep saying it because the politicians still keep talking about the middle class. The fact is, only 61% of Americans think they're members of the middle class. 90% think they're hardworking taxpayers. Please, the public wants you to appeal to how hard they work, recognize it, empathize with it, so that they too will not get a tax increase to pay for all of this wasteful Washington spending. You're defending hardworking taxpayers, of which all of you on this call represent that. Let me do a little 3 things about Joe Biden, which are particularly important, and then I will stop in time to take 1 or 2 questions. Number 1, Biden is showing that he is able to keep the Democrats unified by moving to the left. And so you may be angry that he didn't say he was going to spend all this. He didn't say he was going to do all this, but he's doing it because this is how he gets his legislation through. And the truth is, the most powerful individual in the U.S. Senate right now is Joe Manchin. And the second most powerful is the senator from Arizona, Kristen Sinema. And between the 2 of them, they are going to determine whether or not you guys are writing checks of multi-millions of dollars. This is not an issue of moving the ball forward. This is an issue of preventing everything from being undone and then going even further and making things more expensive for you all. Second, he will be undone by the elements of what he's spending on. And what bothers people the most is the idea that he's bailing out state and local governments who are wasting the money that you earned through your hard work. Waste, I'm going to give you the phrase, waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. Please stop accusing Joe Biden of lying. No one likes that. No one appreciates it. It actually makes them angry. Instead, talk about the corruptive force of giving money and giving benefits and passing laws for the lobbyists and special interests that backed your campaign, that got you elected. This is just simply political payback. That they will believe, and that they are all universally opposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And third, the public has turned against corporations in America to a degree that is even greater than the period in 2008, 2009, when we had the economic meltdown. You are in favor of employers, not corporations. You're in favor of employees, not workers. We're all in this together. You need to talk about how this stuff will benefit all of us, not just a few. So it's a really important message that you be inclusive, that you speak universally, and that you accept that as this economy gets better, they're going to want to hit the rich because they see the rich are getting even richer. So Pat, in 9 minutes, that's kind of where we are. And I am happy to open it up to questions. I feel good. You now know where we are with Joe Biden. And by the way, Biden's numbers are much better than Donald Trump's at this time, although they're much worse than any other president at this time. But that's simply because we're a more divided country. But I am really afraid of what's coming next because they're going to get the votes to get it through the House of Representatives. The question is, does Joe Manchin stand firm? And we don't know the answer to that. So Pat, I'll turn it back to you.
So Brandon, could you check to see if Patrick O'Connor is, because I don't see him on the call. He should have the invite. Can you check with him, please?
Yeah, I'll confirm.
Okay. So Frank, I have a question, and that is, I mean, it's a big question, I guess. What is, or is anything going to bring the Republican Party together in a unified manner? It seems so splintered. And what is it going to be? Is there anything that can make that happen? And it seems like it just gets more and more splintered.
Yes, it is getting worse, and it's a real problem. It's getting worse because Donald Trump is making it worse. And I know that we got strong Trump supporters on this call, but it is a fact that Trump is telling people that their votes don't matter, that the election was stolen. And because of that, people aren't going to vote in 2022. Kevin McCarthy should be the speaker. All of this legislation would come to a halt if Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans win a majority. but it is impossible for them to win a majority if Donald Trump keeps telling people that your vote is meaningless. So, Pat, I can't fix that because he is not willing to be silent, and no one on this call can fix that either. But the percentage of Republicans that are turning against the Republican Party is growing every single day.
Well, but is Trump the only problem, Frank? I mean, it seems like there are others that are contributing to this as well, either this extreme right or, you know, the more moderate or liberal right.
Yes, and because people want to disagree with each other, and they will disagree if there aren't projects to get them focused. And the problem is, they're all focused on taking control of their element of the GOP, rather than being focused on expanding the base, expanding the reach, or frankly, in winning the next election. It's all a circular firing squad. And to tell you that it wasn't, I'd be dishonest. I can't do that. It's not in me. I did an interview today with the New York Times. It was in Kara Swisher's podcast. You can actually hear me speaking. And they put out a 45-minute, which is almost all of it. And we talk about this. We talk about the role of technology. And the fact is, it is biased against Republicans, but it is a fact of life. We talk about Trump's claims that the election was stolen, which it wasn't. For it to have been stolen, he didn't just lose in one state or two states or three states. You'd have to win 4 states where you're asking for a shift of 2 or 3 or 4%. It did not happen. But 40% of the GOP thinks the election was stolen, and they may not vote in 2022.
Well, so we have a question from Chris Wheaton, who I was going to ask of Russ or Brandon, but I'm going to ask of you also, Frank, and that is, do you think any of this legislation that Biden has proposed, whether it's increase in capital gains or increase in income taxes, the elimination of step up in basis, I mean, all of these things, do you think any of those things are going to be retroactive to January 1 of this year?
We don't know the answer. You have to assume yes, but we don't know the answer because that may be something that Joe Manchin is prepared to negotiate, which is he says, okay, I'll accept the higher taxes, but I will not accept screwing people by taking money that they had not planned on. So you can make your changes now this year. That is not determined. No one knows. But because they made it retroactive under the Clinton administration, you have to assume that that will be their effort this time. Hey, Pat, I have a house to sell and I would have sold it. It's now 20 years old and I'm going to pay a lot of money because I didn't sell it. But I actually thought that Republicans were going to win 1 seat in the Senate in Georgia and that none of this would be necessary. For those of you who think that the Republicans will get their act together, I remind you, on election day, Republicans had a 4-point generic ballot advantage in Georgia, but because of what Trump said again and again and again and again and again and again, Republicans did not turn out and vote. And that's why we now have a Democratic Senate and why we're even having this question and this conversation.
Well, so Frank, I'm going to give you this opportunity, which you don't have to take. Is there anything you want to say about Tucker Carlson and this video that's obviously going around in his 30 minutes on Fox News?
Yeah, I have to say to you, you have no idea what it's like to be the focus of such hate and how hard it is for someone like me, who's a consensus builder, to take on a personal level. I agree with 80% of what Tucker says. I want to be on the side of many of the people in his army, but I don't, the ugliness of it, I've never supported. The negativity, I've never supported. And the world does not know that the genesis of this is his brother used to work for me and I had to fire him. And I'm not going to say this in a public way because I don't want to harm somebody else. Tucker doesn't care about the damage that he does to people. He just goes at them. There's a reason for why he's going after me. And he's been going after me now for years because he wants to get even with me. I have to take it because I do not want to bring someone innocent into this process. But I appreciate your willingness to let me respond. And all I'll say is I am proud of my work to get people vaccinated and working with the White House because I want people to live, and they will live with the vaccine or they'll die with COVID. I'm proud of the work that I'm doing on immigration because we have to both respect the need for border security and achieve a new immigration policy. We're not going to deport those kids. They came here through no fault of their own. They don't even speak Spanish. And I'm trying to find some sort of sensible middle. I'm proud of working on education reform. We're about to spend more money than we've ever spent on schools. And all we're going to do is waste it. And you guys are going to be furious when your kids are no smarter 5 years from now. And we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars. And finally, I'm proud that I'm working for some moderate Arab countries in the Middle East as a Jew. Because in the end, we need peace in the Middle East, not war. We need understanding, not terrorism. And if I can bring that understanding to the Middle Eastern communities, then I will have deserved my place on earth. That is what I'm trying to do. I had a stroke last year. I don't know how much time I got. So for the last 15 months, I've been trying to do good for as many people as possible. And Pat, you're one of them. So thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Frank the friend. You've been a great friend, and you've been, as I've always say, even though you don't like me to call you this, a great American and a great patriot. And, we're lucky to have your help and support. So I appreciate that. Russ, did you have a question for Frank? Because you raised your hand, but maybe you did that by accident. You're on mute, Russ.
I'll make it quick. Frank, which is easier to raise taxes on? Is it the wealthy individuals or the big C corporations?
Here's the good news. It's easier to do it on the corporations than wealthy individuals. And they will focus on the corporations. Here's the problem. The bad news is that his stuff is so expensive that corporate taxes alone won't get him where he needs to go. So has to go after the wealthy.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Exactly. All right, Frank, we thank you for your time. Have a good, safe flight. And hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to you next week or this weekend.
Yeah, I'll be around. Thanks.
Okay, take care. All right, Brandon, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can introduce Patrick O'Connor. And Patrick, thank you so much for being on this call today. We really appreciate it. For those of you who didn't see the agenda, Patrick is the legislative assistant for Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas. And thanks for being on the call. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, and Pat, I'll just add just really quickly, as Pat mentioned, Patrick is just been a joy to work with. He is a legislative assistant for Congressman Henry Cuellar. He's been with the Congressman for 6 years, and he has been working with us closely along with Congressman Arrington and also Senator Cotton on the rate reduction bill. So Patrick, just again, on behalf of Policy and Taxation Group and the families on this phone, thank you so much for your good work. And we'll just appreciate any remarks that you might have to share with us about the bill and the process going forward on taxes, but specifically on the estate tax.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's definitely hard to follow Frank Luntz. So it's a hard act to follow, but I definitely appreciate the introduction. So yeah, we are I'm sure you're all aware, we of course are the Democratic co-lead on this bill. We've been working well with Arrington, as he had said. In fact, I actually spoke with Mason in Arrington's office actually earlier today. I'm not sure how much detail y'all have gone into the bill and introduction, but we're feeling next week would be the best time later in the week. That would be the introductory date. And kind of the strategy here is that, of course, if I may be blunt, the Congressman wants the death tax repealed. That's the end goal, overall in the long term. We, of course, think of this as, a good approach to cut in half. The Congressman wants to protect family businesses. When he votes, he thinks about his district. He doesn't necessarily worry about what, is popular with the party or popular with one faction in the party. He wants to vote his district because, frankly, the ones that, gave him the honor of representing them. And so, we definitely are pleased that, Arrington reached out to us on this bill. We're definitely trying to work it and, just try to protect American businesses. I mean, we're going through such a difficult time, one of the hardest times in American history. And I feel like now is the time to essentially help the small business out there, the family business out there, rather than hurt them. And I think this would be a good opportunity to do that. I think we should be looking at all options. I don't think we should be, hurting people with more regulations, hurting people by potentially, raising anything on them. So that's kind of our perspective. That's where we're coming from. And we're hoping by helping to introduce this legislation, being as the co-lead, that we can send a message to the administration as well as our colleagues that, this is a bipartisan issue. I think both sides can agree that we want to protect, families, and, we have one of the highest rates in the developed world. I think we're fourth in this regard. So anything that we can do or anything that you all can do to help us would be wonderful. We want to get this done. Absolutely.
Well, Patrick, we again appreciate that update. And I know you have just a few minutes because you have to go into the hearing. So Pat, I don't know if you or Russ or if anybody else has maybe a quick question or anything you wanted to ask Patrick while he's with us today.
Yeah, I guess I would ask Patrick, we've been focusing, as you know, with Democrats, primarily the Problem Solvers Conference. We've always been a bipartisan organization. Both organizations are Policy and Taxation Group as well as Family Enterprise USA. It's critically important that we get support from both sides.
Right.
So maybe, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but maybe what do you think is the most compelling message to Democrats around rate reduction or repeal of gift, estate, and generation skipping tax?
I think at the end of the day, I think of all the kind of moderates and the blue dogs, and I'm not sure if you're aware, although this is a little bit different, there actually was some movement by 13 Democrats sending a letter to the Biden administration, essentially mentioning this very topic. Although ours is a little bit different, they're focusing on farmers, but I think essentially what they said. I think that we're in a very difficult spot economically speaking. I think this is an opportunity to actually help people rather than hurt them. And I think that with that kind of going out there and with our introduction of legislation, I think we do have an opportunity to kind of send a clear message. So when I talk to these, other fellow blue dogs, I think they speak the same language as us. I think I mean referring to the congressman, referring to the idea that we should be, helping small businesses rather than hurting them, helping family-owned businesses. I think it's as simple as that, really. And I think a lot of them are on the same page, in my personal opinion. And I'm glad to see that letter because now I know who my targets are actually.
Yeah, exactly.
I know exactly all 13 of them. So that's
That's
I'm
great.
good. It was good to see that. Actually, it's funny. Mason was the first one to point it out to me. Mason actually, he kind of messaged me and he said, "Hey, we got some movement." So only thing I could say is like, "Hey, where was my invitation?" So I, we're glad to see that. And I really think, I don't mean to go into politics here, but I really think a lot of these blue dogs really need to keep this in mind. They need to keep in mind that we should, protect American jobs, protect American families. So that's just, I think that's going to be on the top topic, going into the midterms.
Well, we agree. We're very excited, and we're going to work very hard with you to get all of those Democrats as well as more. I've been working on this issue way too long, and I have to remind people that in 2000 we had 65 Democrats in the House sign on to repeal of estate tax. So I know we live in a different world, but I'm still the optimist that we can get back to days where we can make this more of a bipartisan issue. So once again, really appreciate your support. So Brandon, Russ, anyone else on the call have a question?
Brandon. Or Patrick, this is Russ Sullivan. Just give us just a little bit about your boss's district and the kind of industries that are the leaders in developing the economy there, and a little bit of the history and development.
Absolutely. Well, no, I appreciate that question. So the Congressman's district, so we're talking, it's a very large district, actually. It goes all the way up from part of San Antonio, which is shared by several members, all the way down to kind of the Rio Grande. You got Laredo, you have Mission. And so a lot of jobs down there. We're talking oil and gas. We're talking big ag industry down there. We have a large border patrol sector out there, of course. So we're on the front lines down there. So, if I were to summarize the boss and his stances, I would say he's pro-business. I would say he's pro-border security. In fact, he's on the subcommittee for Homeland Security on appropriations. We have Randolph Air Force Base down in our district. So the congressman, we also have a large, retail industry, a lot of franchises down there. So we're always trying to find the best way to promote the small businesses. When I go down there usually in August. We'll meet with city managers, we'll meet with mayors. And I always ask them the same question right at the gate. I say, what is your industry here? And, where are the jobs coming from? And I almost guarantee you throughout the district, it's going to come down to the same things that I'd mentioned, oil, gas, transportation, trucking, trade. Trade is a very large industry for us. We are right on the border. We love to brag about being the largest, one of the largest inland ports in the nation, if not the largest. So if you want to summarize them, trade, homeland security, oil and gas, and just promoting small businesses down there. People down there, they don't want to be overburdened with regulations. We're trying to promote business down there. And a lot of people, we can't subscribe to kind of the national politics that we kind of see every day, because when you talk to people down there, that's not what they're following. They want to know, how's he making business, better for them. These are people that, a lot of small business owners, a lot of blue collar workers. And so that's kind of why the boss is the way he is. And he's always been that way. And I don't see anything changing, frankly, regardless of what's popular or not.
Well, Patrick, I know you have another call. Thank you for that. Another call that you have to jump on. So I really appreciate your time on the call today. Thanks once again, and thanks for all your support and work that you're doing for us with us.
Absolutely. Looks like my alarm is going off. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much. Thank you for being a resource, and reach out anytime should you need anything. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick.
Okay,
All right.
perfect.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So now we're going to move on to Russ Sullivan. Most of you know
Pat,
Russ, the Brownstein Law Firm. Yes,
Pat,
Brandon?
sorry, just really quickly, if you want, I can just give folks an update just really quickly on the status of the bill in terms
Sure.
of.
Okay, Brandon, good suggestion.
Yeah, just wanted to.
Go ahead. And so what you're going to talk about is the rate reduction bill that's going to be introduced in the House as well, we hope, in the Senate.
Yep. Yeah, so we've coordinated this year. So now that we have a bipartisan group with it'll be Congressman Arrington and Cuellar will be the leads. And then Mr. Fleischman from Tennessee has already signed on to be a co-sponsor. So we have 3 folks that will be as originals in the House. And then on the Senate, Senator Cotton has again agreed to take the lead. He's, I know, reaching out to the folks who signed on last year. So there likely will be at least 5 senators that will be signed on as original co-sponsors. The current plan is to do a joint, a bicameral, bipartisan introduction. And it will be most likely be next Wednesday or Thursday. They're going to be doing a lot of press around it. I know that we've coordinated with Pat about doing press as well from the PATG perspective, and really try to make a splash with this. As we talked about with Mason and Patrick, and then with the folks in Senator Cotton's office, I think, with all of that's going on, which Russ will talk about in a minute, in terms of the, really the attack on wealthy Americans. And I think to develop this narrative is going to be really important. So we're going to be seeing that introduced next week, and then go forward trying to build out co-sponsors from a strategic perspective on the rate reduction bill. Specifically, we're going to be targeting Democrats in the House, and I'll talk about that letter that Patrick referenced later on. But we have a target group of a little bit more than a dozen folks that we think are at least worthy of reaching out to. And once we have identified our universe of potential Democrats, we'll then build out the Republican support as much as possible. So a lot of progress, and thanks to everybody on the call who's been engaged and been helpful in pursuing Congressman Cuellar, especially those who have been in the meetings with us thus far. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back to you, Russ.
Great, thank you. All right, today I want to explain to you what the president proposed last week on the American Families Plan, which had nearly $2 trillion in spending and tax cuts paid for by taxes on successful working Americans. And so here we go. Let me outline the, I can figure out how to move.
Hit your arrow.
Yeah, I'm on screen sharing. There we go.
Yep.
Okay, so here's an outline of the plan. On the spending side, there's about $1 trillion in spending and about $800 billion in tax cuts. As you can see on the spending side, it's heavily focused on childcare, preschool, universal free preschool for 3 and 4 years olds, childcare assistance for parents, as well as some assistance for workers, childcare field, paid leave, 2 years of community college. All of those each cost about $200 billion. Then there's increase in Pell Grants as well, and some nutrition and UI changes. For tax cuts, it's all family centered. The ACA premium credit that was implemented for 1 year during the last ARPA, the March COVID bill, is extended out. And then same with the child tax credit going up to $3,000, $3,600 for preschoolers, the child dependent care credits, as well as the earned income credit. So that's the 1.8 trillion in spending and tax cuts. And so it has to be paid for. And so Biden, like his campaign, said he's going to focus on wealthy Americans to pay for it. So the plan taxes successful individuals, investors, entrepreneurs, death, and provides increased compliance funding for the IRS. Brandon's going to talk about death. I'll talk about the others. So this chart shows you why Biden is convinced that he needs to do something to decrease the gap between the wealthiest and the poorest in America. This is a CBO chart, which shows that the income gains at the top 1% of Americans are significantly greater than those of middle and low income households. And so he used this as saying, well, we need to do something. So I'm going to help those at the bottom and the low middle by giving them additional refundable tax credits. And I'm going to increase the taxes on those at the top. So the principal provision here is increasing the top rate back to 39.6%, where it was prior to TCJA. He wants to tax investors. This is where it starts to hit all of us, all of you on this call. Capital gains and qualified dividends. Again, this rate has gone up and down over time. You can see in the chart, it's been as high as 40%. It's been as low as 15%. But it has now seen an increase back to 20, 25, that arena. And then under the proposal would go to 39.6 plus the 3.8% net investment income tax for a 43.4% rate. Now, Biden does not, this is only a half page in a 16-page document. So there's not much details on what he means. He says that it would increase for taxpayers with over $1 million in income. But it doesn't say exactly how you calculate that $1 million in income. It doesn't say whether that's adjusted gross income, taxable income, whether it includes capital gains income or not. And so we're not sure. It doesn't say whether it actually applies to trusts versus individuals. They're taxed under the same code section. The proposal doesn't use the word trust, but when they flesh it out, they may do that as well. The provision says 39.6. It doesn't really say, as you know, we have a number of different capital gains rates. We have one for collectibles and antiques. We have one that's for recaptured real estate. And so presumably they're going to move them all to 39.6, but they're not specific about that either. In addition to this proposal, one subcategory of capital gains deferral is like-kind exchanges in the real estate sector. Like-kind exchanges were eliminated in 2017 for all categories except for real estate. This proposal would eliminate the deferral of gains on like-kind exchanges in excess of $500,000. That's the basic capital gains and dividends proposal. All right, many of you are saying, oh my goodness, is this going to happen? So when is it going to be effective? Well, there's no clue so far. Neither Biden nor any of the folks who are writing tax laws on the Hill in the Ways and Means and Finance Committee, the Democrats, have stated. And history is a little all over the map. Sometimes it's been sort of data first committee action that the chairman of the Finance and Ways and Means Committee said, we're making it effective today, even though the law is not going to pass today. Sometimes it's been date of enactment. Sometimes it's been the next January 1 to keep it even with the calendar year. And so it is just not clear, particularly since we haven't had an increase or change in the capital gains rate increase since 2013. Now that year, the bill came out. This was one of the last bills that I worked on before I retired from the Senate. And it was done all in late December after the election when Obama won re-election. And so the bill kind of came out in December and it was passed actually early January. It was passed on January 1st. And so it was fairly easy in that context. The bill didn't actually come out till right before it was passed by both bodies. And so they made it effective essentially January 1, 2013. However, back in 2003, you can see the bill was originally introduced in February. It was signed in 2003, and the effective date of the decrease then was similar to the effective date, or the date it was signed into law. That is not true in the 1997 balanced budget bill that Clinton negotiated with Republicans on the Hill. The bill was introduced in May and June, and the first committee action in May, an announced date was set of May 7th, and that date held. And even though the bill was signed in August 1997, it was retroactive to May 1997. So those who saw that the bill was out and then completed a transaction, they then had to pay the higher 28% rate rather than the 20% rate. If we all go back to 1986, originally these had earlier effective dates, and as the process moved along, they pushed them out to where it was not a retroactive provision. I would say odds are it's not going to be retroactive, but that it very well could be the date of enactment that it's signed into law, but it also could be at some part, somewhere along the legislative process on the way. And where it is will again depend on what Frank Luntz said, on what Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and any Democrat who's willing to vote no will insist on if they include this provision. Now, I will say, I don't think the capital gains rate is going up to 39.6, and I'll tell you why. There are already some Democrats who've said they're uncomfortable with a rate that high. They're okay with it going up some, but not to 39.6. Senator Menendez from New Jersey has already said this. Others have echoed it or made similar comments. In addition, the provision, although you would think initially, and most people would think, well, if they raise the rate higher, they'll collect more money. But we all know that's actually not the case, because if the rate's too high, people will just hold those assets. The capital gains are elective. They don't have a deadline to them. It's when you actually sell the property. And so the Joint Tax Committee has determined that sort of the maximizing revenue, the revenue maximization rate is in the 28 to 30%. So I predict that actually the rate that's passed, if Democrats pass this legislation, will be in that range. The bill, the Biden's proposal would tax entrepreneurs, eliminates the carried interest, what we call carried interest, which is the fact that fund managers' share of partnership profits are currently taxed at the capital gains rate. Now, if the rates were going all the way to 39.6, this really wouldn't matter because they'd be the same. But if, in fact, I'm right and they only go up to, say, 30%, then this provision will be examined and probably included so that that subset of individuals are taxed at 39.6%. There's also a provision making permanent or extending the law, providing a limit on excess business losses. And then there's a provision that's not been talked about much so far, but I predict will soon. And that is, we have this 3.8% net investment income tax that called the Medicare tax. And the Biden administration took a proposal from Obama years that it was never enacted to apply this tax to three new categories: limited partners and members of LLCs and partnerships that are actively involved in the business, non-wage earnings of high income S Corp, owner employees, and certain professional service businesses. This would include real estate agents. Now, the proposal, you will not find these words in the proposal. I put these in based on some information I've gotten from the administration that this is what they mean, that they did not specify this, but they're reaching back to an Obama-Biden proposal from 2015. So we expect more details on these when the budget comes out. Finally, there's a proposal to spend $80 billion in additional funding for the IRS, as well as requiring financial institutions to increase the number of 1099 type reports that they make on significant flows in and out of bank accounts. And the interesting thing about this compliance initiative is that Biden asserts that it will raise $700 billion over 10 years. Most of us doubt that's the case, but certainly there would be more collections if there's more reporting. That's been proven a number of times. Nevertheless, for our purposes, I'm all for the compliance initiative because the more that they ascribe to money raised there, the less they will feel the need to raise taxes on capital gains and the estate tax. All right, there's a brief overview of what's on the table. I haven't included the corporate provisions, which is a separate bill. Could get entangled here, but happy to answer any questions on that once Brandon's done.
Okay, thanks, Russ. Appreciate it. Brandon, you want me to share your slides?
Yeah, Pat, that would be great if you don't mind.
Okay.
And thanks for that, Russ. And so as Russ mentioned, I'm going to focus mostly on the proposals dealing with the elimination of step up. So, as everybody is aware, in President Biden's American Families Plan, there is a proposal to eliminate step up in basis. So Pat, if you'll go to the second slide. The proposal is a very high level. It's really a fact sheet, which includes, as Russ kind of outlined, a number of tax changes in addition to some of the other kind of social programs and policies that the administration wants to implement. So they're somewhat lacking in detail. And as Russ mentioned, we'll likely get more information when we see the administration's budget. But just to kind of highlight the key pieces of the Biden step up proposal, it is a taxation imposes capital gains at death. So it provides for a $1 million per person exemption. And it also allows for the current exemption for gains on principal residence. So it's up to $500,000 for couples. If you do not donate your property or the assets to charity, there will be a tax. And then it discusses in somewhat vague terms that they'll be providing relief for both family-owned businesses and farms. We had a call today with the Family Business Estate Tax Coalition. I know that the farm industry is beginning to work with USDA and other groups to kind of flesh out what that relief might look like. There's still not much out there in terms of what specifically the relief would be for family-owned businesses, but we're doing some intelligence gathering, and we'll be discussing with Pat later today how to engage with this further and make sure that our voices are heard and that we have a role in developing those exemptions or whatever that relief may look like. So that, again, is a high-level proposal by the Biden administration. And Pat, if you'll go on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what I think will potentially help shape that framework, and that's legislation. It's called the STEP Act, and I know we flagged this for you all before, but it's legislation that was introduced earlier this year by Senators Van Hollen, Booker, Sanders, Whitehouse, and Warren. This also would eliminate step up. And so for purposes of the tax, property is treated as sold for its fair market value when it's transferred by gift, bequest, or to a non-grantor trust. Similar to the Biden proposal, it's a $1 million exclusion. This would be indexed specifically for inflation. That's not mentioned in the Biden proposal. As with the Biden proposal, this also provides an exclusion for sales of your principal residence. And again, it's the same provision. It's currently in the tax code up to $500,000 per couple. This provides from some additional detail, though. So you can specifically pay this tax over a 15-year period if the gains are from assets that are not actively traded. If you transfer the assets to your spouse and certain trusts, those are exempt. And so again, a little bit additional detail that's not included in the Biden proposal. Similar to the Biden proposal, the gifts and bequests to charities would not be subject to the tax. And then, so that's kind of a highlight of that proposal. Again, I think this is kind of a more in-depth, detailed piece of legislation that will likely shape what we see in Biden's budget. Not sure whether he'll incorporate all of this, but again, I think this is a really good jumping off point to kind of understand where they are in the elimination of step up. And in particular, again, with the relief for family-owned businesses, we're going to be engaged there and try to get additional information because obviously that will be important. So Pat, if you would go on to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the advocacy efforts that we've done so far in terms of the step up proposals. And, we know we've flagged for people on the phone before the study that the Family Business Estate Tax Coalition engaged with EY. And just for a frame of reference for those who may not be familiar, the FBETC, Family Business Estate Tax Coalition, is a group of different organizations on which the Policy and Taxation Group sits on the steering committee, and they, like us, advocate for repeal and reform of the estate tax. Includes the Farm Bureau, NFIB, wholesalers, Cattlemen's Association, American Association of General Contractors, Chamber of Commerce, and others. So a good group of folks. And so we have, I believe, Pat, you've shared the study with the group, correct? They already have a copy of it?
Yes, we have, but we'll send it out again.
Okay. So just to kind of hit a couple of the key highlights of the study. So what it did is basically it did an examination of two different approaches to repealing step up. So the first are similar to the proposals that I just discussed. And so it's basically imposing on capital gains at death. And then the other deals with carryover basis. And so that basically the transfer at death is not a recognition event. But then when the heir does sell the property, it would be then taxed and there would not be step up allowed. So between those two different approaches, EY estimated that the first, which is the one that's in the Biden proposal, would raise about $204 billion over 10 years, and carryover basis would raise about $110 billion. So, that is kind of a threshold level. We then move on to talk about some of the issues when we're giving this report, some of the issues with these types of proposals. So the first deals with business unrealized gains. So EY found that 43% of unrealized gains are unrealized gains on businesses, and that excludes unrealized gains on primary housing, that the business share increases. When you exclude unrealized gains on primary housing, that means the business share increases to 60%. Obviously, there's a lot of liquidity impacts. We've talked about this in terms of businesses that are very that do not necessarily have a lot of cash on hand, and the values tied up in the business, and the impact of having to either sell the business or property, and the impact that has on one's ability to pass the business down between generations. The next piece talks about also increased compliance costs and disputes with the IRS, because determining the basis can be difficult. Valuing the assets can be difficult. And so there's going to be increased costs here, which is, at a time when family businesses are already facing a lot of issues in recovering from COVID, the last thing that we need is to have increased compliance and have to take on the IRS for a proposal that is just not well-founded and good policy. So again, going on to the last piece in terms of complexity, again, proposals to tax gains at death have contained rules that are supposed to ease the liquidity burdens, but they are very complex and likely to be difficult to administer. So we highlight all of those things when we're talking about these proposals with people on the Hill. I'll get into the Hill meetings we've talked about that we've had in just a second. But again, there's a lot of issues with these proposals, and so we highlight those as well. In terms of the macroeconomic impact, so that's, again, one of the key pieces that we have engaged them to study. And so they used a particular model, which is very, well-founded in statistics. And it found that if the proposal that the Biden administration is moving forward with were to be implemented, you'd see about 80,000 jobs lost each year for the first 10 years. After that, every year would lose another 100,000 jobs. An additional interesting piece is that if you were, for every $100 of revenue that's raised by repealing step up, you'd see workers' wages decline by $32. So it's basically nearly 1/3 of every dollar of revenue raised comes out of the paychecks of U.S. workers. And that's been very, very, I think, a very good statistic that helps, show the impact of basically, taxing the American workers to raise this revenue. And I think that's something that thus far has been well received, and it's been quite concerning, especially to our Republican colleagues. And then finally, the impact on GDP. When you repeal step up as is proposed by the Biden administration, over a 10-year period, you see a decrease in GDP by $100 billion. So again, there is revenue raised, but there's a lot of other, when you look at it on a macro level, there's a lot of negative impacts that just make it, from our perspective, not a good way to raise the money, not an efficient way to raise the revenue, and it'll have an impact on those that was not intended to have an impact on. So in terms of some of the additional things that are going forward, there is a Dear Colleague letter that was sent out by Congressman Jason Smith and Congressman Fishbach. They had, I believe it was sent out this week, and it has 153 signatures on it. Unfortunately, the letter is only Republican signed. However, as Patrick mentioned today, there was a group of 13 Democrats led by Iowa's Cindy Axne, and then also California's Jim Costa, who we've met with about the rate reduction legislation that basically talked about exempting family farms from the tax increase. And so dealing specifically with step up and basis. Again, focused on farms, but again, a sign that there is, I think, within the Democratic Party, an understanding that, there needs to be certain carve outs and exemptions for different industries and different types of businesses because of the significant impact that it was likely to have. Beyond that, again, I'll just mention just a couple of other things. Next week, there will be a hearing on the Ways and Means Select Committee on revenue measures. They'll be talking about, it's titled The Tax Code's Advantageous Treatment of the Wealthy. So this will focus, from our understanding, on wealth tax proposals, but in particular on the step up and basis issue. So again, I mentioned that Pat and Russ and I will be talking later today to go over how to engage there and make sure that we're having our voices heard, to submit a letter and a statement as part of that. But as Frank mentioned in the beginning, this is just beginning to kind of, get more steam, and we're going to see a lot more discussion about this over the coming months. Lastly, the last thing I'll just mention is, again, the Hill meetings. With regard to the EY study, the Family Business Estate Tax Coalition has arranged five different meetings. So we'll be meeting with House and Senate Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee, and then Finance Committee, and the same thing with the Democrats on both of those committees, as well as the Joint Committee on Taxation. So a lot of efforts going on there, and I will pause and turn it back to Pat to see if there's questions for myself or for Russ.
Yeah, so I'd just like to comment on this EY study. I think, Brandon, the most important part of this EY study is the macroeconomics impacts. While you don't have those statistics on the screen under the last third bullet point, we need to provide those. And we've done that in a graphic that we'll send out again. It's really, really important that people understand this eliminates 80,000 jobs every year for 10 years, and then 100,000 jobs every year after that. And the GDP impact is critically important, as well as for every $100 of tax, there's $32 lost in wages. So we need to use this study. We need to really get legislators to understand the real cost of elimination step up. So I also want to talk about, what does elimination and step up mean? Some of us, I thought that elimination of step up just mean that it didn't mean that you were actually going to pay a capital gains tax and a death tax or a estate tax. But in fact, that's a reality. And that's why you've seen some of these numbers being floated around about a 61% rate of tax. And it would be more if the capital gains tax you pay on those assets, with the maybe only $1 to $2.5 million exemption, is not deductible against that estate tax you're going to pay. So this is, it's a double-edged sword. The reason, and I have to remind people of this all the time, you get a step up in basis is because you pay a 40% on the full value of the asset, not just the appreciation. And I think that's lost on most people. And I don't think most of these groups, including us, do a very good job articulating that. That's what we're going to talk about on our call later today. We really need better, newer information and how to convey that information. And Frank's going to help us do that as well. I also wanted to address, Martin asked a question of family business carve out and farms being carved out of this elimination of step up in basis. And do we have any more clarification around that? I wish we had more clarification. The coalition talked about that on our call today. They don't know any more than we know. No one seems to really understand what that definition will entail. I am very apprehensive about it because in the late 90s, and Russ will remember this, there was legislation passed called QFOBI, Qualified Family Business Carve Out, and it did attempt to do just that. And it was so unworkable that it was actually repealed by the Congress after 6 or 7 years. So on the one hand, it's nice that they're exempting someone, being farmers and family business. On the other hand, we're not optimistic anything's really going to materialize out of that exemption. So we don't have any more clarification around that. I've asked other people, and unless Russ, you or Brandon have any more clarification, I don't have.
Pat, I'll just jump in. I'll just say, because I was reviewing the STEP Act press release that was issued from Van Hollen and others, and they talk about providing relief to family businesses and farms by providing that $1 million exemption. So it's not really targeted. It's not a targeted exemption or targeted at all in their proposal, but that's how they've put it in the terms of a frame of reference. Now with Biden, I know that, like we mentioned was mentioned on the call, there is discussion, at least on the farming side, about trying to look at some way to do a relief for farming. And from what I understand, they're going to do something similar for family businesses. Don't know what it looks like, but it's also possible that they could try to just kind of go in that same route and say that the $1 million exemption is that relief. But what we just don't know, but we certainly will seek clarification.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We don't know if we're going to live with the current exemption amount or 11.5 million plus, or if we're going to have a 1 million exemption. There's lots of questions. And so this is really, really an active time. It's a really important time for you on the call. Please meet with your legislators. Please talk to them. Please explain to this how this is going to hurt you and your family. So I don't see any further questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So Brandon, do you have any last words that you'd like to?
All I'll just say is, again, we're going to be really actively engaging Democrats. There's 13 in particular on that letter, as well as Republicans after we've finished our Democratic outreach. So, Pat will be in touch with those that potentially have operations or connections with those districts. So this is really the time to really put all your time and effort in, because it's a really precarious position to be in if you're a family-owned business, and we need to put all of our efforts into this. So to the extent you can be helpful and engage with your lawmakers, both at home and here in our meetings, we would appreciate it, and it would be very well received.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Thanks to all of you on the call today. Thanks for your continued support. And once again, if you're not supporting us, please do so. We need you more than ever. Thanks so much. Take care.